Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to be here. My name is Helen Tung, and I'm a legal futurist. Now, before I start, I wanted to ask you a question. How many of you have watched The Matrix? Oh, good. Almost everyone. So as I load up my presentation, I would like to, in essence, share with you, I've been on a roller coaster ride from being from Melbourne to Hong Kong, working in London, and going to the US, where I spent a few months in Singularity University at NASA Research Park. And for me, I felt like Neo in the character of The Matrix. And if you recall that film, actually, it's a very philosophical film, which I feel is very appropriate for today's theme. It's about the law, future, and knowledge. In one of the scenes, if you recall, after Neo's been reprogrammed, he fights Orpheus in the scene where he's learning Kung Fu, if you recall that. And at one point, he's being blocked by Orpheus, and Orpheus asks him, "Is that what you can do?" And at that point, Neo realizes he's not sure whether he's living in reality or simulation, but in anything, he breaks through that blockage and he defeats Orpheus. So, I'm going to deal with the why do we do what we do? Why do you do what you do? Asking the deeper questions. And from that reasoning, ask a further question, and what are those reasons and why? Why do we do this? Well, I would like to premise my talk on the future, on the technology, that on the basis that this is what's going to happen. So I'm playing the devil's advocate today, and I'm going to say that the singularity is here. In other words, evolution of humanity, of technologies, from the steamboat to the conventional way of shipping to now what we're talking about in the industry is smart shipping. Unmanned ships, unmanned cars, unmanned drones. And so yes, the topic of technology and our use of it is all correlated. Alongside this table of exponential growth of technology is the concept of Moore's law. How many of you have heard of Moore's law? So the idea, just to refresh other people's memory, is the concept of as technology grows, for example, if you recall your first computer and how much it cost to the computer that you buy now versus the mobile phone that you first bought, the very big, hand phone, to the mobile phone that you buy now. In cost, there is a diminishing cost in terms of the growth of the product. And what we're going to see is that is probably the reflection of the future. Now, I want to talk about Kurzweil, who was my mentor for the few months that I was in Silicon Valley. How many of you have heard of his name or know of him? Who uses LexisNexis? LexisNexis? Great, I see more hands. So Kurzweil was the very guy that developed the technology before he sold it to LexisNexis in the 1970s. So what I'm trying to do is show you that lawyers are actually early adopters. We used technology before anyone else did at the time. And what I wanted to show is, I did a panel session yesterday where Gerard also sat through, is I asked all the people sitting around the table, the 12 of us, what would you be doing if you're not a lawyer? And it was surprising to see there were many professions that came out. Professional singers, boat makers, artists, pilot. My point is, we have many, many talents within us, and it's not just law. And so part of this idea of talking about lawyering and knowledge management is to appreciate that we have talents within us which we can utilize, be it tapped or untapped. And that is why I want to bring in Kurzweil. He wrote a book called The Singularity is Near in the 1970s. He talked about robotics, nanotech, AI. I encourage all of you to read his book because it will surprise you that the things that he wrote about are things that are happening today in terms of medical, science, and operations. Now, I will talk about another topic which will become clear. There is another person I want to mention. So who is the godfather of disruptive innovation? It's Clayton Christensen. Some of you may have heard of him. I had the pleasure of meeting him and his wife, and he is actually a very humble man. When he talks about his theory of disruptive innovation, he goes, when someone asks him a question, he doesn't say I. He says, theory says, the evidence shows. I find that incredible, how you can be consistent in saying that. But I think what I'm trying to say is, when you get to a level of having such amazing theories, it actually changes things. In his whole talk for an hour or so at a breakfast meeting, he did not talk about disruptive innovation, although that is his forte. Instead, he spoke about values. He spoke about families. He spoke about decisions we make in life. And the one takeaway I had from his talk, which was, we don't have a strategy or a plan for the unintended consequences of our success. You may be a successful partner, you may be a successful associate, businessman, however you want to define it. But there are certain decisions that we make in life where we never had a plan for. So in many ways that is quite helpful because, hey, let's face it, we're facing AI, we have no idea what the consequences of that will be, regardless of whether you're going to do something about it, not do something about it. So it's refreshing, because I think that's probably a subtle way of saying, in his discussions of disruptive innovation, he probably never realized he would become so famous. And here I show the model, but I will explain it quite simply, what, in my view, means. Think SpaceX, think Tesla. That is the best example of disruptive innovation. Basically, you have a new player that comes in, who has no background or industry in the very industry he's or she's going to develop. And then what do? They remodel it, and then they beat the competition by a mile. That is Tesla. How many of you have gone into a showroom, own a Tesla, or seen a Tesla, or even been in one? Fantastic. You get exactly what I mean. I was riding my bicycle in Santa Clara in Silicon Valley. I went to the showroom, and I played around with the machine. Let's say I want to buy a car, I can buy the frame, I can buy the leather seats, choose the colours I want, add the booster feature. It is amazing. It is like a dream car. Make it your own. And when people look at these different statistics, they're like, wait a minute, we look at other competitors like GM, Mitsubishi. They have really had to now look at Tesla and say, what are they doing that makes them so great? So we've got this role reversal where you've got previous established industry leaders like GM that have to take a step back and say, well, what can I learn from this disruptive business model? And of course, we all have heard of Airbnb and Uber. Now, I'm going to talk about the next topic about AlphaGo. That's more personal to me. So as a kid, I used to be trained in Go because my dad used to represent Australia playing Go. I can tell you right now, it is a hard game, even for a young girl. When AlphaGo came out and Google's DeepMind came out, I became very curious again. It sort of rekindled my interest. And the complexity of the game can't be underestimated. So I used to be on the school team for chess and whatnot, but Go is at a different level. I don't know how many of you play Go, but it is a very popular game. In fact, it's I think back in the Tung dynasty or something, it used to be like a war strategist board game, because, to put it in a summary, I got this table just to explain to you the possible moves with the kind of board that you might have. Now, a computer scientist called Victor Alice developed a game tree complexity theory, which is, if you were an expert to play this game, it would take about 150 moves, and for each move, there are 250 options. Now, if you were to reflect in your own life what kind of decisions you need to make, you might think, oh gosh, thank goodness my decision-making doesn't have to be so complicated. But the point I'm trying to make is, we never had machines when playing these kind of games, and we developed, as human beings, developed these games. Now we're saying, can AI take over and make these decisions for us? Or, in fact, of course, beating us. So now I'm going to go a bit further up now, and let's talk about the cloud. So please have an open mind, no judgments, and just be with me for a moment. As you all know, we now upload our documents into the cloud. We believe it's secure, we believe it can contain many, many documents, so it doesn't matter if the hardware fails, we're safe. Now, this idea is pretty much what the Matrix was all about. Memory in the brain, memory chips in the brain. So about 2 years ago, I met a lawyer, and he's away on holiday for conferences for 3 weeks. I said, how do you run your law firm when you're away for 3 weeks? He goes, Helen, I have trained my associates so they think like me. Wow, what a thought. They think like you. And so I have a proposition. I think another lawyer I spoke to today was very frustrated because he can't communicate with his other team members. They're not on the same page. But I gave him a suggestion. What if you didn't need that? What if you guys upload that part of what your message is, that presentation, onto the cloud, and everyone can download how you think? Obviously, there are law and ethics questions. Obviously, there's issues of consent. But I want you to suspend your lawyerly mindset for a moment and be open to the possibility. I'm going to go even a step further. Avatars. Now, how many of you wish you had a twin or a double that could attend IBA and another conference which you're missing out on? In fact, I think one person I spoke to said he had another offer to go to another conference, right? What if you could have all those meetings that you wanted to, and there's a double of you or a triple of you? Now, I'm talking about Avatar, and this project actually, yes, it's not real in the sense of today, right? But we have enough films to know that this is what we're thinking of, right? Avatars in the future where, for instance, we can have a face-to-face meeting, we can have a hologram-like meeting. So in other words, I could be here in, the IBA in Sydney, but yet have a table full of other members around the world as if we were having a live meeting, right? Or we've got different aspects to this. And I will take it back to our existential existence, right? Who wants to live forever? Any hands? Okay. Who believes they can live forever? Wonderful. Because this is case theory. I'll break it down for you. Living forever means for every generation that lives an extra 15 years, you accumulate that equates to living forever. So your children, their grandchildren, etc. He believes that living forever is inevitable. And the reason we say that is because if our existence, our consciousness is our brain, then clearly our body doesn't matter. And if technology allows us to replace our body, then the brain can live on. And particularly when you can upload it into a cloud or even a chip, then it doesn't matter whether you're physically there or not. That is food for thought, by the way. Okay? So I bring it back down to earth for a moment, that really what we have developed in the future is endless. Endless knowledge, endless possibilities, endless way of doing things. And more than ever, we are now having to ask ourselves that question, how are we going to manage all this information? How are we going to manage all this knowledge? Technology can provide us an option. And one thing I really wanted to share with us all is I'm a positivist. So the technology is something we can utilize, something we don't need to fear. In fact, it's just a question of how much can we learn about it and how much are we willing to allow ourselves to learn about it. So my final message before I go away is the limit is not the technology or our ability, but our imagination. If we allow ourselves to see the possibility of doing these very things that will allow us to be the incredible future that we want to be. Thank you very much.